If you want to organize your life, be more mindful, productive, and really connect what you're doing to why you're doing it, then this video was made for you. So I've been bullet journaling for around 8 years at this point, and over the last 8 years, the way that I bullet journal has changed and evolved massively as I figured out what really works for me, what doesn't, and how to really distill down the core essence of bullet journaling as a productivity and life system. A journaling practice is one of the most powerful tools for personal transformation. If you're new here, my name's Izzy. I'm a Cambridge graduate and a doctor. In the 8 years that I've been bullet journaling, I've tried so many different formats, so many different structures, even different sizes of journals. And so today I'm going to be sharing all of the experience and the top tips that I wish that I had known at the very start when setting up all of this bullet journal stuff. If you're interested in going deeper with journaling, I've created a completely free Notion template with my all-time favorite journaling prompts on them, so you can check that out in the link below. If you're not familiar with the bullet journal method, it was developed by one of my friends, Ryder, and is essentially a productivity system where you integrate what you're doing with why you're doing it. And it's a highly customizable journaling method, which you can basically do anything you want with. And so if you've ever thought about bullet journaling before, you might have seen online all these beautiful, gorgeous, artsy spreads that people come up with. And for me personally, this has been about developing mindfulness, productivity, efficiency, and clarity of thought through tracking the past and then figuring out what we should be doing in the present, and also then planning for our future. And so today I'll be walking you through the minimalist method that I use for my bullet journal, because I don't want to be spending hours on my bullet journal and making it look cute, because I'm also not that artistically gifted, unfortunately. So for me, this is much more about keeping it simple and easy to keep up with. I'll also show you how to integrate all of the other journaling techniques that you might use within the bullet journaling system. I absolutely love having all of my journaling stuff in one place, because prior to using the bullet journal method, I used to have a bunch of notes scattered everywhere. I would have to-do lists in all kinds of places. I would use a random sheet of paper for some kind of to-do list each day, or random post-it notes that would be everywhere. I would leave notes in Apple Notes or Google Notes or other note-taking apps, and it was all a big mess. What I've found is the simplicity and beauty of having everything in one journal, and also having a clear system for finding all the things that you were writing about and want to keep track of is amazing. It's transformational. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So this is a selection of some of the bullet journals I've used. I have recently moved to Hong Kong, so I didn't bring quite all of them, but this is a selection of them. And as you can see, they're different sizes, because I actually used to use an A6 bullet journal, and then I've upgraded to A5. So I really feel like I've experimented with lots of different formats, lots of different kinds of paper, lots of different brands of journal over the years. So after 8 years of trying different journals, my personal favorite and my recommendation would be the Leuchtturm 1917 journals. These are the notebooks which have the dot matrix inside them, so essentially this dotted grid, which basically gives you a little bit more of a modular structure to work within, but still doesn't have so much of the input of having an actual grid on it. Some people like a grid. I personally like the dot matrix. So this is the bullet journal I'm going to be using for the coming year. I've chosen in this nice purple color. I think it's important that you choose a bullet journal that sparks joy for you, because this journal is going to be with you, following you around for the next year, hopefully. And so for it to spark joy means that every time that you use it, which is hopefully multiple times a day, you'll have that extra little sparkle of joy. A variation on the Leuchtturm 1917, which I really like, is Ryder has designed this bullet journal version of the Leuchtturm 1917, and he actually gave me a personalized version of it, which is absolutely gorgeous. And essentially this has a key and also a couple of bullet journal specific pages at the start, such as this index page here, along with having these markers here for the third lines and a couple of other bullet journaling supporting structures within it. The paper's also a little bit thicker, and I just really enjoy this format of the journal. I'll link below everything that I'm recommending, so you can check it out if you want. The next thing, other than the journal itself, that you'll want is something to write with. So for me, my absolute favorite are the Muji pens. So these are the Muji gel pens. I like a 0.5mm black gel ink pen. I also love that they do these in a whole range of colors. And so this is the pen that I always carry in a pen loop right next to my journal. The next piece of equipment is a ruler. So a short little little ruler like this is ideal because it's easy to maneuver around on the page. And what you'll be using this for is for drawing out any grid lines, any lines that you need basically to keep it nice and straight. Honestly, this is kind of optional because especially with a dot matrix notebook, you can actually kind of hand draw it and it still looks cute. But I like to keep one of these around anyway. Another thing that I find very helpful is to have some kind of correction tape. So this is just standard white correction tape, which basically allows you to erase any mistakes that you might have made. Because one of the big barriers to getting going with bullet journaling or any kind of physical journal is a feeling of perfectionism, where I would get this so much as well, where I'm like, oh, I'm scared to taint the page because if I make a mistake, then I can't take this back, especially if it's in pen rather than pencil. And so this just removes some of that perfectionism, removes some of that fear, because it's like, you know what, if I do mess up a little bit, all good, I'll just put a little bit of correction tape on it. And I think in general for the bullet journal, letting go of perfectionism is a big part of it, because if you actually want to use the system and get the most out of it, you can't feel this sense of hesitation on towards tainting the page. And this is another reason why I personally enjoy having a bullet journal focused on minimalism and effectiveness rather than on art, because for me, as a not particularly artsy person, having a beautiful journal that I could then mess up felt like it prevented me from even using it or being consistent with it, let alone the hours of time it takes to actually make it look beautiful. The biggest trap that people who want to start bullet journaling run into is perfectionism, and I think seeing all these beautiful artsy spreads can set the bar very high, and we almost give ourselves too much stuff to do, because actually we want to do the opposite. When we're building up a new habit or a new productivity system like a bullet journal or any kind of journaling practice, we want to start with the absolute bare minimum. What is the minimum viable stuff that we can do to actually build the habit and get into the process of figuring out how it fits into our lives and what we want to bolt on top of that afterwards, rather than setting ourselves up to fail from the start because we have set ourselves too much to do. The next thing that you might want, which is completely optional, is some accent pens. This is just to add a little pop of color to your bullet journal and is totally optional. So for example, for me, I sometimes use a purple Muji pen or sometimes a green one and then sometimes a blue one. So for me, these are the three other pen colors that I use. And I also use this Tombow brush pen style thing as a little bit of a highlight. So I sometimes like highlight behind some lettering and then I can just write something like, let's say October. And it adds a little bit of a break, a little bit of a pop of color into the bullet journal. The first thing that you want to understand with bullet journaling is to have a key set up, which is essentially that a dot means that there's a task. A dot that has a cross through it means it's a completed task. A dash is some kind of note or something that you want to remember. A dot that has an arrow through it means that the task has been migrated to another time. Equally, for a dot with an arrow backwards, that means a task has been scheduled. And then a little circle like this is an event. So maybe an appointment that you have or a birthday dinner. And then if there's anything that either a note or an event or a task that you add a star to, that means it's important. And anything that you add an exclamation point to means that it is urgent. For me, at the start of every bullet journal, I also like to make sure that I've written out and measured how many squares are vertical and horizontal on the page so that I don't have to go back and count them out every single time. Helpfully for the Leuchtturm 1917 notebooks, each gap between the dots is exactly 0.5 centimeter, which makes calculations a lot easier. So when I'm numbering it here, I'm numbering it from 0 to 36, which means that there are 36 squares vertically and 24 squares horizontally. Another thing I like to do early on is to test out my pens, because some pens bleed through paper. Depending on which notebook you've got, how thick the paper is, what kind of quality the paper is, they might bleed through. So sometimes it's worth just testing out, how do my pens look? Are they looking cute? Are they staying on the right side of the page? And then just flipping over and having a look on the other side to see if it's bleeding through. For this journal here, this is the official bullet journal Leuchtturm 1917 version, and Ryder made sure to make the paper thicker so things really don't bleed through. I find that with the standard Leuchtturm, the paper is very slightly thinner, which means the notebooks are lighter, but there is a little bit more show through depending on which pens you use. So this might be worth testing out early on as well. Now we're pretty much set up to get going. The first thing that you want to set up in your bullet journal, once you've got your key, is your index page. Your index page is essentially the table of contents for your bullet journal. And the reason why this is very important is because if you're including almost anything in your bullet journal and stacking lots of different kinds of journals within it, different kinds of collections, then you want to be able to easily and quickly find where all these things are. Helpfully, the Leuchtturm notebooks are also numbered, and so you don't need to hand number the page. pages. In a notebook which is not numbered, numbering the pages is helpful. And so what you want to do is at the top of the page, write down index. I usually like to keep the style very simple here. Some people enjoy practicing a little bit of hand lettering. This is something I've moved away from over time because it just adds a little bit of complexity to the whole bullet journaling experience. But you can also do this kind of thing. So if the arty thing is your jam, you can also do that. I personally think there's something very beautiful about just a very minimalist style, so I always go for this kind of thing. And then what you want to go ahead and do is to create a margin on one side. And then what you'll be putting in the margin is the page number, and then in the body section, it's the contents. So for example, maybe on page 5, you have your 2025 goals. And on that page, you've written out all the goals that you have. Or for example, on page 23, you have your March monthly log. I usually reserve a double spread for the index just to have plenty of breathing room and not worry about running out of space. Some people, when they do bullet journaling, they like to include something called a future log, which is almost an overview of the year. But when I've done this in the past, I found that I very rarely use my future log because most of the daily stuff that I actually use is in either the monthly or the daily logs. So in the spirit of keeping this as minimal as possible, we will move directly onto the monthly logs, which is where I recommend starting if you want a really simple setup that will be easy to maintain. The first thing to do when you're setting up your monthly log is to write down the name of the month at the top, and then to write down all the dates in the month. I usually do this down at the left hand side. I usually start from the bottom just to make sure that I have enough space, or you can count the squares as well, or use your ruler to measure how many squares you need to leave. Then next to that, write out the letters of the days of the week. I also like to write out the weekend letters in a different color, so this is where I'll use one of my accent colors. And on this side of the spread, what I use this for is any key dates that I want to remember. So let's say any holidays we're going on. So for example, mid-January, I'm going on a little baby moon with my husband Ali. So we can just draw this out here, and I'll just write on the side of it, baby moon. Or for example, if it is my dad's birthday. And so I'll note down any key things that are going on in the month that I want to be aware of. And then when it comes to the day, I use this as a highlight space, somewhere to remember one story-worthy moment from my day. This is a concept from the book Story-Worthy by Matthew Dix, where he talks about how learning to identify and piece together the stories in our lives is a really powerful way of becoming better storytellers and also understanding ourselves more deeply. At the top of the page, I'll often write down some kind of intention for the month. So for example, in January, maybe my intention would be connection. Then what I also often do is I'll sometimes write out a little calendar view here in the top right, just to get an overview of the month, and then I'll fill in my highlights as I go through the month. Then on the opposite side of the spread, I usually do a habit tracker and a gratitude journal. This will all come together, I promise, and it will make sense why I'm doing things in this way, because this is all very intentional. And so then what I'll do is, because I've already got the dates and the days on the left-hand column here, I will just copy across this highlight that I did. Alternatively, you can also rewrite down the days of the week or the dates in this column here, depending on whether or not you want to use a highlightery type thing. And then I will also mark off the top of the month and also the bottom. Then I'll decide how many habits I want to work on each month. Usually I aim for about 3 or 4 so that I can really focus in on them and focus on building each habit. And so for me this month, what I want to really focus in on is sleeping by 11 p.m. because I find that if I sleep early, it's not even that early, but if I sleep before 11, then my quality of sleep is just much better. I also want to meditate every day, and I also want to track when I am creating content. So what I'm defining this as is if I have filmed a YouTube video, if I have created an Instagram post or scheduled one, or if I have written a newsletter issue. And so if I've done any of those, I will actually write down in the column here, YouTube or Instagram or newsletter. And so for these ones on the right hand side, sleeping by 11 and meditating, if I've done that in a given day, so let's say if on the 1st of January, I have filled in my highlight of lovely New Year's Day. So let's say when I'm doing my daily check-in on my monthly spread, I fill in what I've done as the highlight of the 1st of January. Then I fill in any habits that I've done. So for example, if I've slept by 11, then I will do it put across. If I meditate, I'll put across. Then in the rest of the space, I want to have a gratitude journal. Gratitude journaling is one of the most evidence-based forms of journaling for improving your mood and helping you to focus on the positive, beautiful things in life, which in turn actually makes your experience of the world and therefore your actual inner world a more joyful and grateful place. So here, because I've already got all the dates here, I don't need to fill them in again because I kind of roughly know where where all the dates slot in. And so then I will just write at the top here, gratitude, and each day maybe I'll say I'm grateful for the love of my family and friends. And the reason why I put everything all on this one spread with both the story-worthy highlights, the gratitude, and also the habits is because then just on one spread, I can just go to this one spread every single day, fill in a couple of quick things which just take a minute or two, and then at the end of the month, I can see a full month of highlights and gratitudes and also have that mindful awareness of how all of my habits are going. For the habit tracker, I this month have chosen sleeping by 11, meditating daily, and also creating content. And the key thing here is that I'm not necessarily trying to do all of these things every day. It's more a tool for awareness and mindfulness of how often I am actually doing these things and whether this is aligning with the kind of person I want to become or how I want to show up in the world. And so the point of the habit tracker is not to make yourself feel bad or beat yourself up if you've missed a day, but rather to just give yourself and empower yourself with the awareness of how it's going. If you feel like this isn't something that would be helpful for you, you can just leave off the habit tracker bit and just have the gratitude bit. Or if you only want to do habits and you have a lot of habits that you want to track, then you can just do habits on this side of the page. It's all very personalizable, which is the beautiful bit of bullet journaling. Again, here for the sleeping by 11 p.m. or meditating, if I've done any of those things, then I'll just put a cross in the box. And for the creating content, I have created a key here, which is if I have filmed a YouTube video, if I have scheduled an Instagram post or posted an Instagram post, or if I have written a full newsletter issue, then I will write down the corresponding letters in this box, either YT, IG, or N. Then on the next page of the monthly log is a monthly check-in, and I really like doing this to check in on how I'm doing in the three main domains, which is body, mind, and spirit. I find the monthly check-in really helpful because sometimes it's easy to lose track of how we're feeling in our body, mind, and spirit between the weeks and days and months of the year, because we're like, oh, I had that back pain at some point in the year, but I've kind of forgotten when that was. And so in the emotional check-in section, I use a lot of I feel statements. I try to figure out what my mental state was for the past month and how I'm doing right now, and also link in anything that has impacted on my mental or emotional state. In the physical section, I will often write about things such as any joint pains I have. For example, I sprained my back doing deadlifts a couple of months ago, and it's taken a little while to heal. I've re-injured it a couple of times, and so tracking that has been very helpful. I'll also sometimes track my skin, any breakouts, or how my skincare routine's going, or things like my diet and how much exercise I've been doing. In terms of the spiritual section, this sounds a little bit woo-woo, but actually is more focused around how connected am I to my spiritual practices, my mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and how am I feeling in my relationships. And so I'll write about that a little bit. And also to get a sense of whether I feel aligned with a sense of purpose, some kind of mission in the world. On this side of the spread at the start of the month, I usually do a big brain dump. Often there are lots of things that just create mental clutter because we're slightly worried about them at the back of our minds. There's some things that we're kind of losing track of. And so when I feel overwhelmed at all, I just like to do a brain dump. And you can do this at any time in your bullet journal. You don't even need to do it at the start of the month. I just like to do it as a monthly ritual, a monthly check-in on all of the tasks or things that are on my mind at the moment. I'll often split the page in two because often I have things that are to do with work and things that are to do with my more personal life or other things like admin. And so by splitting it up in this way, it means that there's a lot of clarity as to where all of the bits and bobs go. So that means there's two double-sided spreads for each monthly log. And so on one side there is the daily highlights for the month, then on the other side there is the daily gratitudes and maybe a habit tracker. Obviously feel free to tweak as needed for you and what works best for you. And then there is the monthly check-in spread and the brain dump. And so these two double spread pages set me up for a good month ahead. Once I've done my brain dump, I like to get straight into the daily logs. And one thing I absolutely love about doing daily logging in the bullet journal method is that you don't need to have prepped in advance loads of pages and pages and pages for each day or each week. And instead you just use the journal as you need to use it, however much space you need, whether you only need one line per day or you forget to use it that day, or if you need pages suddenly for a day because because there's so much stuff that's come up. So for the daily log, what you want to start with is just simply the date and then any tasks or thoughts that you might have. So I like to begin with any events that I have. So for example, if I have a yoga class, then I'll write that down just to be aware of the rough schedule for the day. And then often I'll refer back to my monthly logs brain dump to see if there are any items, any to-dos that I could migrate into my daily log. So for example, from here, maybe buying the gift for the neighbors, I can actually add that into here. And once I've migrated it to the daily log, I can put a little arrow through this to say, okay, this has been actually moved forwards into the journal. Then if anything interesting happened that I want to take a note of, I'll use a little dash here. And sometimes I'll also use this little note here to note any feelings. Then once it's the next day, I will just continue below where I finished off. So the next day would be Thursday, the 2nd of January. And I'll do the same thing here. And so for example, if I hadn't actually done this and bought the gift for the neighbors, I could again migrate it forward. Another thing that I like to do is that if I have a meeting or if I just even have some interesting thoughts at some point during the day. So for example, if I'm having a meeting with our co-founder for one of the apps that we're building, then I might write down here, Life Compass meeting notes. And then underneath this, I will be able to doodle anything that I want, any notes that I need to take during that meeting, any to-dos that come out of the end of that as well, any actionables can just go into this stream of consciousness, which is the daily log. Another tool that's quite useful to insert into the daily log is a weekly review. And so this helps us set the direction for the coming week. I personally don't do this as a very formally structured drawing out boxes on a spread, because I often find that I either don't fill up the boxes and feel bad about the wasted space, or I have way too much for the boxes and then it becomes really cramped and unpleasant to use. And so I like to keep it freeform and just continue this stream of consciousness. So for example, if I did want to do a weekly review, I could just decide, you know what, over here I'm just going to do a weekly review. Doing a weekly review is one of my favorite ways to check in on whether I'm staying on track with my goals and where I want to be, and looking back at the past week and then planning for the next week and setting action intentions for how I'm going to move towards my goals. So you can either do this inline, and I often like to do this just inline in my bullet journal, or you can dedicate a whole page each week to doing your weekly review. Another thing is, once you have your daily log set up, this is basically where you work for the day. And let's say you think of some kind of task, let's say booking a cinema ticket, but you don't need to book it today. You need to book it next week or in 3 weeks time when the tickets are released. Then you can essentially mark with a back arrow like this that you are putting it into your monthly brain dump. And so then you go here and then you add in book cinema ticket. And so in this way, you can easily migrate tasks from your monthly brain dump into your daily log, and also the other way around. So hopefully then between these two directions, nothing gets lost, because on a monthly basis, you do your brain dump, you get all of the things out of your head, and you also migrate any to-dos that you missed from previous months or previous daily logs, and you bring them into your brain dump once a month and consolidate things down, remove things that are not essential, and figure out, okay, what's actually important here, because I'm going to have to write it out again, which is one of my favorite mechanisms in the bullet journal method, which is that the analog format of it adds inherent friction, which is actually a feature. It's not a flaw, it's a feature. And so then you can move things out of your monthly brain dump into your daily logs, and then on the daily basis, if you think of any tasks and you just chuck them into your daily log just to get them out of your brain onto paper, then at the end of the day you can decide, okay, is this something I'm actually realistically going to do today or in the next couple of days, or is this something that I can migrate back into my monthly brain dump and then figure out where it can slot in a future daily log. The final thing I want to touch on is creating collections. Collections are essentially a free page where you can write about basically anything you want. So you might want to create a collection about your goal setting. So let's say it's 2025 goal setting. And then you can write down any of your goals that you have this year. Or another collection that I've personally been using quite a lot is having a meditation journal embedded within the bullet journal. So here I'll just write at the top of the page, meditation journal. And then each day I can take some notes on how my meditation was and any interesting thoughts that came up, any distractions, how settled I was. But I want to say that the collections thing is very much optional. The core of the bullet journal structure is definitely the monthly logs and then the daily logs. And so once you have those two, Basically everything else is optional. Now let's talk about how to integrate other journaling structures into your bullet journal. And so what I like to do is under my daily log, if I feel like doing a little bit more reflection, I will just make a note. I'll make a little dash and then write down the prompt that I'm working with, such as what would my higher self advise me to do in this situation? And then I will write down a couple of thoughts based on that. Essentially, the bullet journal structure is extremely fluid and adaptable to exactly what you need at any given moment. Life isn't predictable, and it's very hard for us to fit our lives into a specific structure because at every moment, every day, every year, our life looks different. We have different needs, we have different requirements, different focuses, and so then our journal should reflect that. So that is my complete bullet journal method, which I use to this day and integrate all of my other journaling methods into. Like I mentioned at the start, if you're interested in more journaling prompts, I have a bunch of my free favorite journaling prompts. I have left a link below. If you want to hear regular updates from me, you might want to follow my newsletter or my Instagram at Izzy Sealey. If you enjoyed this video, I think you're going to enjoy this video over here where I talk through more of my top journaling tips. These are the exact prompts and mindsets and approaches to journaling that I would recommend, and you can slot these into the bullet journal system. So check out that video over there. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself and remember that the journey is the destination. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!